They said we were late to the stars. Primitive, fractured, loud, a species still bleeding from its own history. But we were listening, even when they thought we couldn't hear. The first signal wasn't even meant for us. A tight beam transmission skipped across the edges of our solar system, a pulse of mathematics and intent. Cold, precise, alien. We caught it by accident. Some thought it was noise, others a glitch. But a few believed. It took 6 years to decode the first layer. Another 3 to send a reply. Earth's governments bickered. Private corporations offered to buy the frequency, and conspiracy theorists lost their minds. But somewhere beneath all the noise, the message was clear. We are not alone. And we never were. The Galactic Assembly did not expect a response, let alone from us. Not from a species that had barely survived its own atmosphere, still burning oil and shouting over borders. But we responded anyway, with urgency, clumsiness, and a declaration. We seek to join you, as equals. They laughed, not cruelly, dismissively. We were a curiosity, a species of contradiction, war and art, hate and hope. Our ambassadors were met with polite indifference, their speeches translated and forgotten. But we weren't trying to impress. We were watching, learning, in a chamber older than our civilization, filled with voices from hundreds of worlds. Our representative, Dr. Elijah Rhodes, stood quietly for 5 full minutes before speaking. We don't claim to be ready, he said, but we're coming anyway. That's what we do. That moment didn't change anything. Not immediately, but it echoed. A species that had no right to speak spoke, and then it acted. Back home, Earth was uniting the only way it knew how, chaotically under pressure. The United Terran Initiative was born not out of idealism but necessity. Engineers, linguists, diplomats, ex-soldiers, AI ethicists, rogue inventors, the best and the worst of humanity, shoved together under one roof and told to build a starship. They called it the Endeavor. Not poetic, functional. It would carry the first human crew capable of reaching deep space without relying on alien corridors. No support, no safety net, just a leap into the unknown, powered by fusion and stubbornness. It wasn't elegant. It hummed like a dragon with a sore throat, but it flew. On launch day, the world held its breath. Every channel, every broadcast, even the ones that mocked the mission weeks before, watched. No fireworks. No flags, just steel cutting through silence and fire peeling away from the Earth's skin. The crew was handpicked. Commander Arya Sato, a former test pilot with nerve endings made of wire. Data specialist Miguel Reyes, who once hacked a Martian security grid just to prove he could. Dr. Lynn Osei, who knew more about alien biology than most aliens. And engineer Jonah Malik, who rebuilt the ship's core engine 3 days before launch using components not meant to exist together. They didn't expect to come back. That wasn't the point. The first jump nearly tore the ship apart. Gravity buckled. Time bent. The crew aged 6 minutes, while Earth ticked forward 21 hours. But they emerged intact, on the edge of Gliese 442, a system barely mapped and wholly ignored. The data they returned with would have been enough to justify everything. Atmospheric breakdowns, mineral composition, signs of microbial life. But none of it mattered after the second jump. Something went wrong. Mid-transit, the stabilizers collapsed. The portal fractured. The ship began to shear into dimensional drift, pieces of it blinking in and out of sync. Reyes' console melted in his hands. Arya fought the controls like she was wrestling a god. Jonah didn't hesitate. He tore off his harness, crawled into maintenance shaft with a portable fusion dampener and 20 seconds of oxygen. He didn't say goodbye, just looked at the crew and said, "Hold the line." He stabilized the core manually, bought them enough coherence to finish the jump. They landed lopsided and burning on the surface of a planetoid with no name. Jonah never made it back. The transmission reached Earth 70 hours later. Grainy, damaged, incomplete, but the meaning came through. He gave us time. For the Galactic Assembly, this wasn't remarkable. Species died in exploration. Sacrifices were common. They didn't understand why we mourned so publicly. Why we replayed Jonah's last words on every frequency. Why cities across Earth dimmed their lights for a man few had heard of days before. Because to us, sacrifice was not a calculation. It was human. We buried Jonah on that empty rock. Lynn carved his name into a jagged stone using a sterilizer and a knife. It wasn't about symbolism. It was about memory. When the crew returned, limping through space on patched engines and impossible will, something shifted. Not in the galaxy. Not yet, but in us. We weren't tourists anymore. We weren't asking for permission. We were carving out our place, one risk at a time. Other missions followed, some successful, some lost. But the message remained the same. We are human and we endure. Alien historians wouldn't write about this for years. Some never did. But among archivists, a quiet term began to circulate. The fire kind. Not for our weapons, not for our rage, but because, unlike most, we didn't extinguish when exposed to the void. We burned brighter. And we were just getting started. They didn't know what to make of us. One moment we were duct taping fusion coils to stay alive. The next, we were arguing philosophy with species 5,000 years older than us. They called us erratic, impulsive, and they weren't wrong. But they missed the pattern. We didn't conquer. We didn't beg. We integrated. Our first cultural envoy was dispatched to Threxel Prime, a water-covered world governed by ritual. Every greeting, every movement had a specific rhythm. Deviate by a second, and you insult generations of tradition. Ambassador Irene Malik, Jonah's sister, was briefed extensively. She memorized 12 pages of gesture sequences. It wasn't enough. She bowed when she should have nodded, said thank you too quickly, laughed at a joke that wasn't one. The council chamber went silent. Dozens of ice dogs turned away in coordinated offense. Disaster. But Irene didn't panic. She didn't retreat. She stepped forward, held up both hands, and said, I'm human. That means I mess up, but I always mean it. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't clever. It was honest, and that mattered more. The meeting resumed, awkwardly, hesitantly, but it continued. The Threxel later said her error was authentically imperfect, which they found intriguing. Elsewhere, intrigue took a different shape. A fringe mining colony on the edge of Yalan space was hit by Kordek raiders. Pirates bred in vacuum, armored like warships. The Yalan, despite centuries of peace treaties, abandoned the site. Too dangerous, not worth the risk. But there were humans there, technicians, scientists, families, so they stayed. They built traps from excavator parts and mining lasers, welded railguns from elevator shafts. One team rigged an old shuttle to explode using oxygen overpressure and grease fire chemistry. It worked. The raiders backed off. A Yalan drone caught the footage. In it, a wounded human carried a child, clearly not human, through a field of flaming debris, shielding them with their own body. The image went viral. A dozen civilizations saw it within hours. The caption beneath it read, "They protect what they claim, even when it isn't theirs." We never asked for credit, but the galaxy gave it anyway. Next came the Ingenuity trials, joint engineering missions, mostly ceremonial, designed to let ancient species showcase their superiority. Humans weren't invited at first, until we insisted. They gave us the worst assignment. Terraforming on Zeta 9, a rogue planet with no sun, minus 180 degrees Celsius surface temperature, and a magnetic field that warped digital memory. The Thallery delegation brought cryonic drones and crystalline heat nodes. Elegant, expensive, useless. The humans brought 12 industrial heaters, 2 modified reactors, and a guy named Guts who claimed he could rewire an AI with a screwdriver and hope. 2 weeks in, Thallery tech froze solid. The humans built a heat dome, grew algae, created stable air pockets. They melted a river. When asked how, Chief Engineer Priya Deshmukh just shrugged. "We stop thinking about what we can't do," she said, "and start thinking about what might work." The Thallery were horrified, but the mission was successful. They grudgingly acknowledged the outcome in official records under the note. Method: chaotic. Result: inarguable. We weren't predictable. We weren't safe, but we delivered. So when the Dravani Confederacy approached Earth about mutual defense, we were surprised. They were small, technologically limited, peaceful, and under threat. When asked why they chose humanity, their speaker simply said, "You never leave your own, even when it's inconvenient." The pact was signed without ceremony. No fireworks, just a handshake in a supply corridor on a station too underfunded to be remembered. But for us, it was a line in history. It marked the first time an alien civilization had asked for our protection. Our soldiers adapted. Our medics learned Dravani physiology. Our diplomats didn't condescend. They listened. It wasn't about dominance. It was about showing that strength could serve compassion. Slowly, attitudes changed. A phrase began circulating in academic circles and trading forums alike. The human solution. It didn't mean elegant. It meant fast. It meant dirty. It meant effective. A damaged satellite? Human patch jobs held longer than design repairs. A political stalemate? Drop a human in the room, and the matter would resolve. Loudly, awkwardly, but permanently. Our unpredictability became an asset, and it terrified some. One elder species, the Solari Archontate, warned others. They learn too quickly. They bend rules because they don't see them. They risk because they hope. They meant it as a threat. Others heard it as a promise. We weren't just fitting in. We were reshaping expectations. And yet, through all of it, victories, failures, alliances, we kept our rituals. We remembered our dead. We argued. We protested. We laughed at our leaders. We told stories. Stories of a child who touched starlight. Of an old engineer who stabilized the core with chewing gum and math. Of an ambassador who accidentally insulted a whole species and turned it into a holiday. We stayed human. That was our power, not just our cleverness, not just our fire, but the fact that no matter how vast the galaxy got, we carried Earth with us, in the way we solved problems, in the way we honored each other, in the way we refused to give up. There was no single moment when the galaxy accepted us. It didn't happen with a vote, or a war, or a treaty. It happened in layers, in grudging respect, in second chances offered, in allies made, not bought. By the end of that decade, human outposts dotted 6 sectors. Our language began to influence trade dialects. Our music played in alien night markets. Our doctors performed surgeries no one else would attempt. Our engineers designed starships from salvage and dreams. But most importantly, we changed others. Species once rigid in protocol now allowed improvisation. Warriors once obsessed with honor began asking about mercy. Empires once obsessed with logic began to wonder, what if chaos, too, had value? We were not the strongest. We were not the oldest. But we were the most alive. And that, in the cold silence between stars, meant everything. They thought we had limits. That our persistence had a ceiling. That eventually, we'd fold beneath the weight of scale, of time, of the void. They were wrong. The Andari collapse proved it. A megastructure orbiting the collapsed core of a neutron star, older than any known civilization, engineered by a species that vanished long before language existed on Earth. The site was unstable, sacred to some, feared by others. No one dared enter its interior. Radiation storms, temporal eddies, tech interference, suicide. Humans volunteered, not for conquest, not for profit, for understanding. We sent a crew of 5, no reinforcements, no backup, just calibrated instincts and unshakable resolve. Every species that watched assumed we'd die. One delegate publicly stated, "Let the humans burn themselves chasing myths. It's what they do." He was entirely wrong. Inside, nothing made sense. Gravity spiraled. Light bent like wire. Sound moved in reverse. The ship's AI failed 43 seconds after entry. Standard instruments stopped reading entirely. So the crew reverted to analog, clocks with gears, handheld notebooks, chalk marks on walls. Miguel Reyes, survivor of the Endeavour mission, kept time by tapping a steel rod against the bulkhead every 8 seconds for 5 days. They mapped a path through madness using their own bodies as references. One lost vision. Another began aging backward at a cellular level. One experienced 11 heartbeats per minute while awake. Still, they moved forward. At the core of the megastructure, they found something the galaxy had long given up on: a central archive encoded in spatial harmonics. A data bank so advanced it could only be read by minds willing to reshape themselves to understand it. So they did. They let their minds fracture. They adapted. One learned to read music as language. Another began dreaming in quantum states. They lost part of themselves, memories, identities, pieces of time. But in return, they brought back knowledge, blueprints, mathematics, a full star system stabilizer model, and one simple message buried in the last layer of code: you are not the first, but you may be the last who still tries. When the humans returned, gaunt and altered, they didn't claim victory. They didn't boast. They just handed over the data and said, "It's yours too." That moment silenced the skeptics. The Galactic Assembly issued a formal commendation for perseverance beyond reason. It was the first time the word perseverance had been used as a compliment by the Kelri, a species that once defined strength solely by the number of opponents slain in ritual combat. But not all attention was admiration. There were whispers, warnings. Some claimed humanity was disrupting balance, pulling forgotten truths into a galaxy content with forgetting. The Trelza Conclave, a hyper-intellectual species that once dismissed us as chaotic carbon noise, issued a closed-door mandate: monitor human expansion, restrict joint research, limit access to higher archives. We didn't respond with anger or diplomacy. We just kept going. We terraformed barren moons with algae and machine hybrids, turned derelict stations into thriving markets. We taught children on planets where literacy had never taken hold. We planted forests on rocks no one bothered to name. And when asked why, when pressed for some master plan, we told the truth. There wasn't one. We weren't building an empire. We were building a future. Because humanity wasn't spreading for power. We were doing it for the simple reason that no one else would. Not like us. Not with this much reckless hope. On the fringes, we met others like us. Outliers. Orphans of dead worlds. Species written off as primitive or unstable. We didn't teach them. We didn't lead them. We listened. We collaborated. We adapted together. A race called the Maellan, once reduced to servitude by the Vrax's dominion, joined our networks, not as dependents, as equals. Their bioglass technology now powers 40% of our outer colony ships. The Hrask, who communicated solely through electrical fields, found resonance with our neurological researchers. Their language merged with ours. New words formed. New ideas. The galaxy had categories, hierarchies, rules. We broke them. And in doing so, we offered something rare: permission to change. Of course, resistance grew. The more we succeeded, the more we were seen as dangerous. Not because of what we destroyed, but because of what we refused to. We didn't dismantle flawed systems. We rendered them obsolete. A mining consortium tried to claim exclusive rights to a gas giant's moons. We ignored them, set up cooperative colonies. When they sent mercenaries, we responded with a live stream, broadcasting the entire encounter across every known channel. A single human mother standing in front of a cargo crawler, arms out, unarmed, defying an armored strike team. She didn't move. They backed down. The footage was time-stamped, subtitled, and archived under "Stand Your Ground. Protocol Alpha. Moral Dominance." We didn't use force often, but when we did, it was surgical, reluctant, and unforgettable, because we fought differently. We didn't fight for control. We fought for each other. That was hard to counter. You can predict strategy. You can't predict love. And that, more than technology, more than firepower, was what kept us moving forward. Love for our past, for our species, for the idea that sentient life, no matter how strange, broken, or scattered, deserved a chance. Even the ones who hated us. We forgave them. Not always. Not perfectly. But enough. That mercy confused people. especially those who built cultures on dominance. A Vrax warlord once spat at a human diplomat, saying, "You are soft." She replied, "No, we're sharp. You just don't know where the edge is yet." And she was right, because by now, the galaxy was changing. Not just politically, spiritually. Species began telling stories of humans who gave food without contracts, who rescued stranded freighters at their own expense, who stayed behind after evacuations to make sure the artificial intelligences had emotional closure. We were unpredictable, yes, but also undeniable. A whisper moved between stars, a quiet phrase, usually muttered after an encounter with us. They're not like the others. And they were right. We weren't. We were human, and we still were just getting started. We reached the edge of the mapped galaxy faster than anyone expected. Not because we had better engines. Others still moved faster. Not because we were smarter. Some species thought in 11 dimensions. We reached it because we never stopped moving. The edge was quiet. Too quiet. Beyond it was a black. Not vacuum. Not absence. Something colder. Older. Not empty. Waiting. Scouts went dark. The first warning came from a Fornaxian relay station, scrambled through layers of panic and static. 4 words, chiseled into the signal by sheer force of will. They are already here. No coordinates. No follow-up. Just silence. Most races paused, assessed, modeled threat matrices. Some fortified. Others chose retreat. We didn't, because by now we understood something they didn't. When darkness whispers, you don't argue with it. You show up carrying a light. So we sent a fleet, not a war armada. A response. Scientists, soldiers, medics, translators, risk analysts, volunteers. They called it the Ember Line. It wasn't meant to hold, just to meet the unknown face first. The threat wasn't ships or drones. It was erasure. Concepts that unraveled memory. Shapes that unstitch reality. Logic breaking like glass. Entire crews vanished, their names burned out of data archives. As if history itself was flinching, some species began locking their borders, refused to answer transmissions, disconnected from the mesh. Not us. We kept transmitting. 1,000 voices repeating one message. We are here. We are human. We do not go quietly. The galaxy watched us break and rebuild. One ship, the Resolute, fought for 11 days without reinforcement, surrounded by spatial anomalies and silent specters. When rescue arrived, they found the hull half gone, the engines cannibalized for heat, but the crew was alive, exhausted, scarred, singing. When asked how they held on, the captain simply said, "Because someone had to." Another crew rigged a signal tower inside the event horizon of a collapsing pocket reality. No escape route, just data relays. They knew they wouldn't survive, but they got the message out. A single sentence, unencrypted, unfiltered. Whatever this is, it can bleed. That changed everything, because now it wasn't just horror. Now it was a fight. So we adapted. Again, hybrid tech, mind fire shielding, story-based encryption to confuse the enemy's conceptual breakdown fields. We sent poets with marines, priests with physicists. We wrote code in metaphor, painted war strategies in sound. And for the first time, the darkness flinched, not from power, from meaning. It didn't understand why we resisted, why we clung to each other, why we remembered our dead with names, not numbers, why we laughed in the face of oblivion. But we did. One mission, classified until years later, involved the crew injecting themselves with cognitive stabilizers that fragmented memory, so the enemy couldn't fully erase them. Each crew member carried a different piece of the mission. None of them knew the whole. They had to trust. And they did. Blind, broken, terrified, but they did. They came back changed, but alive and successful. That word meant more now than ever. Alive. Because the thing out there, it didn't hate us. It didn't even know how. It was older than emotion. It consumed because that's all it knew. But we knew more. We knew how to endure. So when the assembly collapsed under pressure, fragmenting into isolationist blocks and hidden enclaves, it wasn't humanity that fell. It was humanity that held the line. The Ember Line became legend, a place, a boundary, a vow. No matter what came from the dark, there would always be someone there to face it. A voice, a signal, a light. Children on distant worlds learned its coordinates before they could read. Allies returned, one by one. The Magellan, now thriving, brought fleets of living ships. The Harass built memory fortresses that housed species' entire cultures as backup. Even the Kelry sent warriors, not as conquerors, but as brothers. It wasn't just humans anymore. It was something larger, something shared. They called it the Accord of Flame, a pact of those who refused to vanish quietly. It wasn't signed in ink. It was written in rescue beacons and shared rations, in silent nods before impossible jumps, in messages like, "Tell Earth we made it." And we kept making it. The threat never fully vanished. It couldn't, but it stopped spreading. Because we were there. A wall made of memory and madness, of songs sung in vacuum, of names etched into hulls. No species had ever fought like this. Not because we had better weapons. Because we remembered what we were fighting for. Every star, every name, every story. In the 100th year of the Ember Line, a new ship was launched. Bigger, smarter, built by dozens of species, carrying no flag. It bore only a phrase along its hull. For those who stood when nothing else would. Its captain was human, but its crew was everyone. And in its core, a black box pulsed, not to record data, but to repeat one phrase every hour. We are still here. The galaxy listened, and the dark did too. Because when humanity arrived on the galactic stage, we didn't bring dominance. We didn't bring order. We brought fire. And fire, in the cold, changes everything.